The day I found out my wife was cheating on me started like any other Thursday, except for the parrot. I should clarify, we didn't own a parrot. Never had. We were not bird people. We were the kind of people who rolled our eyes at those folks who let their parrots ride on their shoulders while they grocery shopped, as if they were suburban pirates looking for discounted yogurt. And yet, there it was, sitting on my kitchen counter, staring at me like it had something to say. "Who let you in?" I asked, more out of genuine confusion than anything else. The parrot fluffed its feathers, tilted its head, and then, clear as day, said, "Oh, Liam, harder, harder." I froze. Now, I am not a morning person. I am barely an afternoon person. So, my brain took a few seconds to process what had just happened. First, the fact that a parrot was in my house. Second, the fact that it had spoken. Third, and most disturbingly, the fact that it had mimicked what could only be described as an enthusiastic bedroom performance, one that did not feature me as a participant. My coffee mug was halfway to my mouth when I set it down, my hands suddenly feeling a little too shaky to trust with hot liquids. "Come again?" I asked, because surely, I had misheard. The parrot blinked, then with perfect articulation, repeated, "Oh, Liam, harder, harder." Only this time, it laughed after saying it. I looked around, half expecting to see a hidden camera or one of those prank your husband setups. But there was no one. Just me, the bird, and the slow, dawning realization that Barbara, my lovely, devoted wife, had apparently been entertaining a guest while I was, I don't know, living under the delusion that my marriage was fine. "Okay," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "This is new." I stood up from my chair, my brain doing mental gymnastics to try and find a rational explanation. Maybe Barbara had, what? Accidentally trained a parrot to fake an affair? Was this a rogue parrot from some neighbor's house? Was I still asleep? Unfortunately, I am not blessed with the ability to lucid dream, and the parrot was still there, looking at me with an expression that I could only describe as smug. So, I did what any sane man would do. I called Barbara. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, babe. What's up?" I looked at the parrot. It looked at me. "Barbara," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "is there a reason why there is a parrot in our kitchen?" Silence. Then, a very careful, "A what?" "A parrot," I repeated, slower this time. "A talking one. A very knowledgeable one." Another pause. And then click. She hung up. Now, I am not a detective. I don't own a trench coat or a magnifying glass. But even I knew that when your wife hangs up on you after being asked about a mystery parrot, something is up. I turned back to the bird, who was now preening itself as if it hadn't just detonated a marriage with one sentence. "All right, big guy," I sighed, crossing my arms. "You're going to tell me everything you know." The parrot stretched its wings, then, in an eerily perfect impression of Barbara's voice, said, "Oh, babe, he's just so boring lately." I felt my eye twitch. It was going to be a long day. The parrot and I had a silent standoff for about 30 seconds after Barbara hung up on me. I'd like to say I was keeping my cool, but the reality was I was debating whether or not I had actually lost my mind. Let's review the facts. 1. There was a parrot in my house. 2. It knew things it shouldn't know. 3. My wife hung up the moment I mentioned it. 4. The parrot had now started humming to itself like a villain in a courtroom drama who knows exactly how guilty they are but are waiting for the grand reveal. I needed answers, and unfortunately, my best lead was a bird. "All right," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting back down across from the little menace. "You and I are going to have a chat." The parrot stretched its wings lazily, as if this was the most uninteresting part of its day. I had a distinct feeling that I was about to get played by a creature that weighed less than a sandwich. "Who taught you that phrase?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. The bird blinked at me. "Do you even have a name?" The parrot let out a slow, almost bored whistle before answering, "Bobby. Bobby. Fantastic." "So, Bobby," I said, leaning forward, "did Barbara bring you here?" No response. "Do you live here now?" Nothing. "Did you witness anything you probably shouldn't have?" The parrot turned its head at an almost condescending angle before answering, in Barbara's exact voice. It's not a big deal. He won't find out. I sat back, running a hand down my face. This was, objectively speaking, not how I expected my morning to go. Just then, the front door opened, and I turned my head so fast I almost gave myself whiplash. Barbara walked in, her face set in an expression I could only describe as, I will pretend nothing is wrong if you pretend nothing is wrong. She took one step inside, saw me, saw Bobby, and immediately turned around like she had just walked into the wrong house. Barbara, I said flatly. She paused mid-turn, sighed dramatically, then slowly pivoted back to face me. Hey, babe, she said, way too cheerfully. What's up? I gestured at the parrot. That's what's up. Her eyes flickered toward the bird, and I could see her brain sprinting through possible excuses at an Olympic-level speed. Oh, that. Right. Funny story, actually. Barbara. Okay, maybe not funny, she admitted, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. But, like, an interesting little mix-up. Barbara. She exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. Look, do we really have to do this right now? I stared at her. She stared back. Then, just to add a little seasoning to the situation, Bobby said, he's such a stupid, in my voice. Barbara's face went pale. I, on the other hand, was now experiencing a brand new kind of frustration. Okay, I said, standing up. You want to explain why the parrot is doing impressions of both of us? Barbara looked at the bird like it had personally betrayed her. Which, to be fair, it had. Where did it come from? I pressed. She bit her lip. Technically, I was watching him for a friend. And which friend would that be? Barbara visibly debated whether or not to come up with a fake name before giving up halfway through. You don't know him, she said finally. I nodded, rubbing my chin. Oh, I'm sure I don't. She groaned. Liam, can you not do the whole sarcastic detective routine right now? I had a long morning. I gestured at Bobby. Yeah? So did I. Found out I'm a stupid, for one. That's okay. That's out of context. I pointed at the bird again. Bobby, context? The parrot ruffled its feathers. Then, in Barbara's voice, Liam wouldn't understand. He never does. Barbara physically winced. I turned back to her. Oh, I understand plenty. She ran a hand through her hair, avoiding my gaze. All right, look. Maybe I was venting. Everyone complains about their spouses sometimes. Sure, I said. Everyone also brings home mysterious parrots that have private recordings of them saying suspicious things. Barbara made a sound that was halfway between a sigh and a growl. You're being dramatic. I laughed. Barbara, we have a talking witness in our kitchen. It's just a bird, Liam. It's a bird that somehow learned phrases from both of us, in our exact voices, and for some reason, repeats sentences that sound a lot like the kind of thing you wouldn't want your husband to hear. Barbara pursed her lips. It's probably just, I don't know, repeating stuff it picked up somewhere else. Oh, sure, I said. You know how common it is for a parrot to overhear very specific phrases about a marriage and then show up in said marriage's kitchen? Barbara folded her arms, looking defensive. Maybe you should be asking why you're so insecure instead of interrogating a bird. I opened my mouth, closed it, took a deep breath. I am not going to have an argument about my insecurities, I said slowly, with a woman who was just betrayed by her own pet informant. Bobby, as if sensing the perfect moment for comedic timing, let out a loud whistle. Barbara's left eye twitched. This is ridiculous, she muttered. Glad we agree on something, I said. I sat back down, staring at her. She stared back. And Bobby, my new favorite pet in the world, simply preened its feathers and announced, in a voice that sounded suspiciously like Barbara's, I told you, we should have gone to his place. Barbara closed her eyes. I leaned back in my chair. Oh, now I'm listening. Barbara stood in the middle of the kitchen, arms crossed, jaw tight, like she was debating whether she could physically will Bobby out of existence through sheer force of annoyance. I, on the other hand, was sitting at the table, watching her unravel like someone who had just realized they left the oven on after boarding a flight. Okay, I said, tapping my fingers on the table. So far, What I know is that a random parrot appeared in our home. It has the vocal abilities of a government wiretap and, oh, right. It seems to have been present for at least one moment where you were somewhere you clearly weren't supposed to be. Barbara exhaled sharply through her nose. Liam, it's a bird. You're acting like it's a court witness. I pointed at Bobby, who had now taken it upon himself to start whistling the Jeopardy theme. That thing is basically a flight-capable lie detector. Barbara rolled her eyes so hard, I'm pretty sure she saw another dimension. You're being dramatic. Am I? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Because it seems to me like you're awfully nervous about a bird that, according to you, means absolutely nothing. Barbara shifted uncomfortably, which was interesting, considering that up until 10 minutes ago, she had been playing the role of a completely innocent person who had absolutely nothing to hide. Liam, she started, tone dangerously close to I need you to shut up before you put the pieces together. He's just repeating things, random things, things that don't mean anything. I stared at her. Then I turned to Bobby, who, after preening himself for a moment, went ahead and destroyed her entire argument with, I told you, we should have gone to his place. Barbara closed her eyes for a second, as if she was mentally buffering. Whose place, Barbara? I asked, tilting my head. She inhaled through her nose, held it, then exhaled like a person who had been stuck in traffic for 4 hours and was about to snap. Liam, seriously? You're taking this out of context. I sat back, arms crossed. Okay, give me the context then. Barbara opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, like she was about to say something, but every option available to her ended with the same result. Her looking even guiltier than she already did. Bobby, enjoying the drama far too much, added, You don't have to leave so soon. He won't be home for hours. I turned back to Barbara, eyebrows raised. She made a noise that sounded like an entire system shutting down. That could mean anything. I let that sit between us for a moment, then slowly turned back to Bobby. Anything else you want to share? The parrot fluffed its feathers, then, in the exact same tone Barbara used when she was trying to sound casual while lying, said, We need to be careful. Liam isn't stupid. Barbara made a noise somewhere between a groan and a low, desperate whimper. I clapped my hands together. Well, that's a glowing review, if I've ever heard one. Barbara put a hand on her forehead. Liam. I stood up. No, Barbara, please. I'm dying to hear the context where that sentence doesn't sound exactly how it sounds. She glared at me, but there was panic in her eyes now. She wasn't in control of this conversation anymore, and she knew it. Liam, this is ridiculous. Is it? I gestured toward Bobby. Because so far, the parrot has given me more information than you have. Barbara groaned again, muttering something under her breath that I'm pretty sure was a list of all the ways she wished she could strangle a bird without it being a crime. I let the silence stretch between us for a few seconds before finally shaking my head. You know, I said, walking toward the counter, I actually wasn't suspicious before. Barbara narrowed her eyes. Oh, don't start. I turned to her. No, really. I was just a guy drinking his coffee, enjoying his morning, living under the assumption that I was in a marriage where my wife wasn't sneaking around and, oh yeah, being actively betrayed by a parrot. Bobby, bless his little feathery heart, added, He's at work all day. What's the problem? I turned to Barbara, grinning. No, Barbara, really, what's the problem? She inhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. Liam, I swear to, this is insane. You're interrogating a bird. Do you hear yourself? I shrugged. Do you hear the bird? Barbara threw her hands in the air, muttering something about how I was being so dramatic and so unreasonable. And wow, wasn't it just so typical of me to take things completely out of proportion? Bobby decided that this was the perfect time to mimic Barbara's voice one more time. I'll tell him when I'm ready. Barbara went rigid. I didn't even bother asking what that one meant. Instead, I turned around, grabbed my keys off the counter, and walked toward the door. Liam, Barbara started, taking a step forward. I held up a hand. Don't. She stopped, pressing her lips together. Bobby, still entirely unaware of the nuclear-level destruction he had caused, let out a cheerful little whistle and announced, "I love you, babe. I'll call you later." I stared at Barbara for another long moment. Then I opened the door, stepped outside, and shut it behind me. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard like it owed me an explanation. I wasn't even sure where I was planning to go. I had stormed out on pure instinct, like my body had just needed to be away from Barbara before I did something regrettable. Not something violent or loud, just something that would make it really hard to ever look at her again without remembering this exact moment. Because that's where I was now, stuck in the moment. The moment where my marriage had effectively fallen apart because a parrot with the intelligence of a small child had blown up whatever mess Barbara had been hiding. And now? Now I had decisions to make. I took a deep breath, my fingers drumming against the wheel. There were two types of men in this situation. The first type was the one who'd pretend not to know, push it down, wait for his wife to come clean like some noble moron who thought giving her time would make the betrayal hurt less. The second type? The second type made sure she regretted ever thinking she could get away with it. And I had just decided which one I was going to be. I took out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and called the one person I knew would love this disaster more than I did. "Liam," said the voice on the other end, "if you're calling me before noon, someone's dead, pregnant, or you finally realized your wife is the worst." "Close," I said. "You busy?" "Not for whatever nonsense this is about to be," said Greg, my best friend since college and the only person who hated Barbara before it was cool. "Talk to me." "Long story short," I said, starting the car, "a parrot told me Barbara's cheating." There was a pause. Then Greg said, "Okay, I'm gonna need you to go ahead and repeat every single word of that sentence because I just know I misheard." I did. Greg listened, completely silent, until I finished. Then he let out a slow, almost reverent whistle. "Liam," he said, "do you understand that this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me personally?" "I do," I said, turning onto the road. "That's why I'm calling you first." There was a rustling noise on his end, followed by the sound of a fridge opening. "All right, so what's the move? Divorce? Drama? Some kind of spectacular public meltdown that we turn into a viral TikTok moment?" "All of the above," I said. Greg let out a delighted laugh. "Oh, I love this for us. Okay, hit me. What's step one?" I tapped my fingers against the wheel, thinking. I could go the standard route, confront Barbara properly, throw her lies back in her face, demand an explanation I wouldn't believe. But that was predictable. And if I'd learned anything from today, it was that Barbara thought she was smarter than me. Time to prove her wrong. "First," I said, "I'm making sure she knows exactly how bad she messed up." "How?" I grinned. "I'm taking Bobby." There was a beat of silence. Then Greg made a noise that I can only describe as pure, unfiltered glee. "Oh, this is going to be incredible." "Pick me up," I said. "We've got a parrot to steal." An hour later, Greg and I were standing outside my house, staring at the front door like it was a heist scene from a movie. "So," Greg said, stretching his arms, "you gonna be cool, or are you gonna do something stupid?" "Both," I said, unlocking the door. Barbara was on the couch, phone in hand, looking way too composed for someone whose entire world had just started to crumble. She looked up when I walked in, her expression shifting immediately into one of deep, practiced irritation. "Oh, so you're back," she said, crossing her arms. I ignored her. Instead, I walked straight to the kitchen, grabbed Bobby's cage off the counter, and turned back toward the door. Barbara sat up straighter. What are you doing?" "Taking Bobby," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Liam, that's not funny." I met her gaze. "Do I look like I'm joking?" She stood up, setting her phone down. "You are not taking the bird." "Why not?" I asked, tilting my head. "You seemed fine throwing him in my face earlier." "Liam," she said, her voice dropping into that warning tone she always used when she thought she could guilt-trip me into backing down. "That's my—" "He's a liability," I interrupted. "And if you're as innocent as you claim, you shouldn't care where he goes, right?" Barbara's jaw clenched. I smiled. "Right?" She exhaled sharply. "You're being ridiculous." "Maybe," I said, turning toward the door. But now you'll never know what else Bobby might say, will you? I didn't wait for her to answer. I walked out, Bobby's cage in hand, and Greg started clapping like I had just given the performance of a lifetime. That, he said, was art. I set Bobby in the back seat of Greg's car. Step 1, complete. Greg slid into the driver's seat, grinning. And step 2? I leaned back, smiling. We find out exactly who she's been sneaking around with. And Bobby, because he had the perfect sense of timing, whistled and said, "See you next time, babe." Greg almost crashed the car from laughing. Bobby was sitting in the back seat like he knew he was part of something big. Every time Greg hit a bump in the road, the bird let out a dramatic little squawk, like this whole situation was inconvenient for him personally. "You realize," Greg said, barely containing his laughter, "that you just kidnapped a parrot as revenge for your wife cheating?" "Correction," I said, scrolling through my phone. "I rescued a parrot. A parrot who, might I add, has been actively helping me uncover an affair I wasn't even looking for." Bobby clicked his beak, tilted his head, and then, in Barbara's exact voice, said, "You always overreact." Greg let out a wheeze. "Liam, I swear to God, this bird is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me." I ignored him, my focus on the task at hand. Step 1 had been simple. Take Bobby and leave Barbara wondering what else the bird might reveal. But step 2? Step 2 required a little more finesse. See, Barbara thought she was smart. She thought she could gaslight me into thinking Bobby's words didn't mean anything, that I was just being paranoid, that she'd eventually talk her way out of this if she stayed calm long enough. What she didn't know was that I had no interest in a heartfelt conversation. I wasn't here for closure. I wasn't looking for an apology or an explanation, or some fake tears about how she had felt so alone or never meant to hurt me. I was here to make sure she regretted every single decision that led up to this moment. And that's exactly what I planned to do. "All right," I said, locking my phone and leaning back in my seat. "I know who she's been seeing." Greg's hands tightened on the wheel. "How?" "She's a moron," I said simply. "She left her Instagram open on the home computer last week. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but I remembered seeing some random guy liking every single one of her posts." Greg raised an eyebrow. And I said, holding up my phone, "He also tagged her in a photo a few weeks ago. Just a little blurry shot from some restaurant. Nothing suspicious. But the caption? Best company in the world." Greg whistled. "You think she was dumb enough to get caught that easily?" I smirked. "Barbara doesn't think she can get caught." Greg glanced at the rearview mirror, looking at Bobby. "So what's the move? We drop the bird off at his house and let him deal with the consequences?" "No," I said. "We do something way better." By the time we got back to my house, Barbara had called me 5 times. I ignored every single one. Greg parked a few houses down, and we both watched as Barbara paced back and forth in the living room, phone in hand, looking exactly like someone who was really regretting not keeping her mouth shut in front of a talking security risk. I turned to Bobby. "All right, buddy. Time for your final performance." Bobby fluffed his feathers, waiting. I took a deep breath, walked up to the door, and let myself in. Barbara spun around the second she saw me. "Liam," she started, voice sharp with frustration. "This is—" I held up a finger. "Nope, don't care." Her mouth snapped shut, and I saw the exact moment she realized she was not in control of this conversation. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, setting Bobby's cage on the table. "You're going to sit down, shut up, and listen." Barbara folded her arms. "You think you can just walk in here and—" I whistled. Bobby responded instantly. "I'll tell him when I'm ready." Barbara's face went pale. I smiled. "Great news. I'm ready now." Barbara's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to reboot her brain. "I know who it is," I said, sitting down on the couch. "His name's Matt. Works in finance. Terrible at keeping his social media private." Barbara swallowed hard. "Now," I continued, "here's the fun part. You have one option. You're going to pack a bag, leave, and never contact me again. In return, I won't send a delightful little audio compilation of Bobby's greatest hits to your entire family, our friends, and, oh yeah, Matt's wife." Barbara looked like she had been punched in the stomach. I leaned back. Oh, didn't know about the wife? Yeah. Turns out, Matt's been real busy. Congratulations. You weren't even his main problem. Barbara sat down, looking like she had completely lost control of her life in the last 2 hours. Which, honestly, she had. I clapped my hands. So, what's it gonna be? Barbara's jaw clenched, and I could see the wheels turning. She was trying to find an escape route, a way to manipulate the situation, a way to make me feel bad, guilty, anything. But there was nothing left to work with. She had lost. Barbara took a shaky breath, then, in the quietest voice I had ever heard from her, said, "I'll pack." I nodded. Good choice. 15 minutes later, she walked out the door with a single suitcase, avoiding eye contact the entire time. Greg, who had been watching from the car, gave me a slow, satisfied nod as I stepped onto the porch. "I gotta say, man," he said, crossing his arms, "I have never been so glad you married that woman." I laughed. "Why?" "Because," he said, pointing at the window where Bobby was still perched, "I never would have gotten to witness the greatest revenge story of all time." Bobby whistled. I turned, looking at the bird who had, unintentionally, just saved me from wasting another decade of my life. "You know what, Bobby?" I said, reaching out to ruffle his feathers. He blinked up at me. I grinned. "You're staying." Barbara was gone. It was funny how quickly a person could disappear from your life. One minute, they were your wife, sharing your bed, your house, your daily routine. The next, they were just a name on legal documents and a problem for someone else to deal with. I stood in my living room, looking around at the space that, up until an hour ago, had felt like a crime scene. Now, it was just a house again. A house with one less liar and one more parrot. Bobby was perched on top of his cage, tilting his head at me like he was waiting for me to say something. "Well," I said, rubbing my face, "that was a disaster." Bobby let out a chirp. "She'll call you later." I snorted. "Yeah, I'd love to see her try." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't even need to check it. Barbara wasn't the type to go quietly. There'd be a last-ditch attempt, some self-serving message about how she hoped we could still talk, or work through this. Or, if she was feeling particularly desperate, some attempt at playing the victim. I pulled the phone out, glanced at the screen, and laughed. "Greg, dude, she's already posted a vague status about regret and growth." I shook my head and sent back a single thumbs-up emoji. Bobby flapped his wings and whistled. "It's not a big deal." "Exactly," I said, setting the phone down. Barbara had spent years thinking she was the smartest person in the room, always 2 steps ahead, always in control. But now? Now she was just another person who'd made a stupid mistake and had to live with the consequences. I wasn't even angry anymore. That was the best part. I had walked into this whole situation expecting to feel devastated, broken, some pathetic shell of a man drinking himself to sleep in a half-empty house. But instead, I just felt relieved. Barbara was someone else's problem now. And I was free. Bobby clicked his beak. "I love you, babe. I'll call you later." I pointed at him. "Don't push it." He whistled innocently. Greg's car pulled up outside, and he rolled down the window. "So, how's single life treating you?" I walked out onto the porch, stretching my arms. "So far, not bad. Except for the part where I now own a parrot who knows way too much." Greg eyed Bobby. "You keeping him?" "Of course," I said. "I owe him my freedom." Greg grinned. "You know what this means, right?" I sighed. "What?" He leaned out of the car. "You're officially that guy. The divorced dude with a weird pet." I considered that for a moment. Then I turned to Bobby. "You okay with that, buddy?" Bobby ruffled his feathers. "He won't be home for hours." Greg cackled. "Oh, this is never going to get old." I shrugged. "Yeah, well, at least someone in this house is honest." Greg gestured toward the car. "Come on, let's get a drink. You've got a new life to celebrate." I glanced back at the house. It looked different now. Lighter. Barbara had taken her lies with her. I had Bobby. And for the first time in a long time, I actually felt good about the future. I stepped off the porch, smiling. "Let's go." Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel